Welcome back. Now, we'd like our drone to be hostile, which means we'd like it to shoot with its rifles here. And to do that, we need to know specific locations on our mesh. And there is a way to do that using sockets. Sockets are a way to specify a location on a mesh that we can then access later on when we need those locations relative to the mesh. So we're going to add sockets for our rifles. We do that by finding our static mesh asset, SM drone, and opening that up. And notice that we have a tab next to details called Socket Manager. Now, if you don't see that, or if you accidentally close it out, you can go to Window and find Socket Manager and open it back up. This is how we can add sockets to our mesh. So we're going to add a couple of sockets. We do so by pressing on the plus to create a socket, and we need to give it a meaningful name. I'm going to call this rifle_L, and this will be for the rifle's left socket. Now notice it's at the central point of our mesh. It's actually at the mesh's pivot point, which is the center of our drone, but we can move it. Notice we have the translation gizmo, and I'm going to move it. Now, as soon as I do, I notice that snapping is enabled, and I'd like to disable snapping for more precise movement. So I'm going to disable snapping, and I'd like to move this to just in front of this rifle here. I know there are 3 rifles on each side, which is kind of a lot. We're just going to use 1 per side. So I'm going to use this largest rifle here. And if I want, I can position this in 3D space here, or I can make use of the side view by clicking up here on perspective and changing this to left. And using my mouse wheel to scroll in, I can see that I'm looking from the left. I can right click to move around, and I can see that socket relative to my mesh. And if I want to see this in wireframe, I can go up to lit and change it to wireframe. And now we can actually see those translation gizmos, and I can move my socket forward. So I'm going to zoom in to see that rifle that I'd like to use, and I'm going to move my socket to just in front of it. But I'd like to also go to front view. So I'm going to switch from left to front and find my rifle and move my socket to just in front of that rifle. Now we know that we're right there where we want to be. And I can go back into perspective and see that my socket is right here in front of the rifle. Now I can select it and see that its forward direction is forward. That's correct. And its up direction is up. And this is very important because later we're going to access the socket and get properties such as its location and its rotation. And it needs to be pointing forward so that later we can spawn some projectiles and have them point in the correct direction so they fly in the correct direction. So we now have a socket in front of our left rifle. I'd like another socket in front of the right rifle. So I'm going to click plus to create a socket and call this rifle_R. And I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to move this to just in front of that rifle on the right side. So I'm going to go from perspective. I'm going to change it to left. And I'm just going to move the rifle to just about the same location here as the other socket. I'm also going to switch to front, and I'm going to move this over to the left so it's just in front of that rifle there. And I can go back to perspective, and I see that I have my 2 sockets. They're both facing forward. If I select them, I see that their forward directions are forward, their up directions are up, their right directions are right. Everything looks correct. We now have sockets. And now we need to learn how to access those sockets so we can get their locations and rotations in space. So let's do that next. We'll go ahead and save and close SM Drone and go back to our BP bot so that we can use those socket locations. For now, I'm just going to draw some debug spheres at those socket locations. And to do that, we need to access those socket locations. So just after my set actor rotation here in event tick, I'm going to grab my bot mesh and drag it out. And from my bot mesh, we can access the function get socket. And check this out. We have get socket location, rotation. We even have get socket transform. which contains location, rotation, and scale information. For now, I'm just going to use getSocketLocation, and notice that getSocketLocation requires a socket name. That's because we named our sockets. Remember, we called one of them rifle_L and the other rifle_R. And I'm going to duplicate getSocketLocation with Control D with that node selected and change the in-socket name on this one to rifle_R and hook up BotMesh to that. And now we have two vectors, which are the locations of these sockets. And I'd like to draw debug spheres for these. So I'm going to get a draw debug sphere node. And we'll first draw the left rifle socket. Let's hook in that getSocketLocation for the center. The radius can be small. Let's make it 10. And the line color can be a red color. And the duration can be 0 because we're drawing this sphere every frame in tick. Now let's just see what this looks like with just this one drawing the rifle L socket location. Let's go ahead and press play. And there it is. We can see that we have a debug sphere at that socket location. And it's updating every frame. And we can easily draw the other one. Let's go ahead and duplicate that draw debug sphere and hook up the rifle_R location to that one. We can even make it a different color if we like. I'm going to go ahead and make the radius 5 on both of these so it's even smaller. And let's play test this. And there we go. We have the left and right sockets. They're right there, and we can use those to spawn projectiles once we learn how to do that. So adding a socket to a mesh is pretty easy. We add it in the static mesh editor. We position it where we want it relative to the pivot point on that static mesh. And later on, we can access its transform information with getSocketLocation, rotation, or transform, which requires the socket name. Excellent job. Now that we know how to get the socket location, it's time to start working on spawning projectiles from those rifles. I'll see you soon.